Okay, welcome to Chapter 7. So the next couple of chapters are really about Java and have very little to do with Androids, but we're still going to use Android Studio as our mechanism for demonstrating all this stuff. So we're going to do the exact same pattern. This should be familiar to you guys by now. We're going to create a new project. We're going to go down here to an empty activity. I'm going to call mine, Chapter 7. So this part should be fairly normal. We wait for the thing to pop up. Okay, and now we're going to make some tweaks to it the way we've been doing in the last couple of times. I'm going to go to Layout. I'm going to whack, basically I'm going to whack this guy. I'm going to delete him and then turn right around and create another one just like it called Activity Main. And we're going to use the good old linear layout. Okie dokie. So now we have an empty linear layout, and one of the things we're going to need some output. So I'm just going to go down here and grab a multi-line text guy and drag him on here, and I'm going to change his attribute so he just consumes the whole page, because that's all we need. We don't need any buttons or anything because that's not what we're doing. Alright, so I'm going to go to Attributes, and I'm going to tell it that the height is going to be the match the parent. So it's basically going to consume the entire screen. Cool? Now that's all the Android stuff we're going to do. So now that we got that, I need to change the name of it because I don't like the name, or it doesn't actually have a name. I'm going to call mine the way I'm going to be consistent. I'm going to call them ET, that's the Hungarian notation, 2 or 3 letter, talking about what it is. It's an edit text. And I'm going to call mine Display, just because that's a cool name. And it comes up and says, hey man, you want to do that? It's like, yeah, sure, go right ahead. Okay, we're going to go down to here. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to create us a variable with a high scope. And it's going to be edit text. If I could type this to go a lot faster. ET display. And of course, it's never heard of that before in its entire life. And so we need to go in there and do that. And then down here, we need to go and grab that thing. We need to go in and take the XML file and turn it into something that Java can use. You guys remember how all the inflation stuff works? ET display is equal. I'm going to go ahead and use the cast, although it's not technically required here. It's good programming hygiene. And then find view by ID, r.id, and this should be ET display. Okay, so this is how we're going to start all of our applications from now on. So you might as well just kind of get this thing ready. Okay, now that we got it ready, now we can dive into the book. So page 181, it talks about, variables, operators, and expressions. So this is a quick tour of what you're supposed to have learned in the CIS4311 class, the beginning Java class. Okay, so here's some terms that you should know, and I'm kind of sort of assuming you know, maybe. And that is, you should know what a class is, you should know what an object is, and you should know what a method is. So this is a class. A class is a recipe for what's going to happen. And then we don't typically create the instance of the main activity because that's being done for us. But if we create another class, which we'll be doing here shortly, then we'll have to go in and create an instance of that class. And so an object is an instance of a class is a phrase that we're going to use over and over again. So just kind of sort of keep that in your mind. And so, yes, you should know the difference between a class and an object. Yeah. And you should know what a method is. A method is basically like this. This is a method. So this is a class because it says so. This is a protected void, blah, 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 blah. It didn't actually say the word method, but that's a method. Okay. Now, things that you should remember from the Java class is that Java is case sensitive. I mean, I can't go in here and say, I can't change that to a capital E. It's going to come back and say, what the heck are you talking about? So that's one of the things you have to remember. And that it should be fairly obvious that all of the lines are terminated with a semicolon. Now, a line is kind of an interesting term because later on when we start talking about loops, in other words, this is not a line, right? That's not really a line. So what's a line and what's not a line is kind of confusing because I don't have a semicolon like at the end here or here. It's because this is all like considered a method, and you don't need or want to put a semicolon at the end of a method. You only want to put them at the end of a line. I know that distinction is a little vague, and keeping at it, you'll make sense of it all. On page 181, they start talking about Java in the big picture. Java is everywhere. I mean, it's got a lot of usage. I mean, it's been around for quite some time. Sun Microsystems, a really cool company, did a first release of Java back in 1996. They were very proud of it and used it in all sorts of stuff. It was kind of like a cool side project for them. They're not really they weren't at the time, really like a software programming house. They were just a general purpose computing. They made hardware, they made software, they made operating systems, they did all sorts of stuff. But a general purpose, generic style language, that really wasn't what they did for a living. Okay. It gained popularity. It was very easy to learn, easy to use, and its real claim to fame is you write it once and it can run absolutely anywhere. That was the point. One application could run on Linux, could run on Apple, could run on DOS, could run on Windows, didn't matter. One application, it all just went across. One of the things that's kind of weird is everybody kind of liked Java, and so they decided, well, we're going to go ahead and take it to the standards committee. So they went ahead and asked, Mother May I from the standards committee, can we submit our language? And they said, sure, go right ahead. But they never actually did. They never actually went through the motions and got it approved. They decided, no, I don't want the standards committee to have complete control over our language. I think we're just going to be greedy. Oh, okay, now that was probably mean. We're just not going to have somebody else being in control of our stuff. We're just going to do it ourselves. And so they basically said, nah, never mind, change my mind. I don't want to have a standard. Let's just have a standards committee of our very own, and we'll control the whole thing. I'm like, woohoo! Well, that worked pretty well. And then Oracle purchased all of Sun Microsystems to include, their database line, to include all sorts of other stuff. So Oracle now is the big daddy for Java. Now, for the longest time, the Java Development Kit and the Java Runtime Engine were things that you could just download for free. There was no licensing. There was nothing. It was just easy. And then just recently, well, that depends on what you mean recently is, a while back, Oracle decided, I don't think I like that. I think we're going to start charging for people to use our Java Development Kit. So they started licensing the JDK, the Java Development Kit. Well, that freaked out a few people, and so they forked, no, that's not a dirty word, they forked the language over and created another open source version. It's called OpenJDK. So the official one from Oracle is the Java Development Kit, and then the free and open source one is OpenJDK. So, for example, at the university, we had a choice. We could install the real one, but the license agreement would have meant that we would have had to have paid something. I have no idea how much we'd have to have paid, but we had to have paid something. Or we could switch over to the OpenJDK and not pay anything. Which do you think we did? Yeah, we went and purged the honest-to-God Oracle version out of all of our machines and swapped it out with the OpenJDK. Okay, so that's just kind of a history lesson. So Java is everywhere. I mean, it's in desktop applications, right? You could just write a regular, write a game or something that runs on it. Web applications, yeah, people use Java for doing web stuff. And it's even in hardware things like, TVs and cable, set-top boxes and, sat-nav and, the stuff in your car, like Apple CarPlay, and they have, there's even an Android Auto which is essentially the same thing. All these, Internet of Things, IoT, that's a horrible acronym. And then, of course, phones like Android phones. So Java is absolutely everywhere. Now, Java is not necessarily the only choice for doing Android work. The Kotlin, I don't actually know how it's pronounced. Kotlin is what the big boys use. And just like the big boys use the constraint layout. Well, we're not big boys. We're learning this stuff. So I'm not using Kotlin. I'm using Java because that's the background you're supposed to have for this course. And secondly, I'm not using the constraint layout, even though, quite frankly, it probably is superior in lots of ways. I'm just going to stick with the plain old linear layout because it's just easy for us to wrap our heads around what's going on. Okay, so continuing. On page 182, they start talking about syntax and jargon. Oh, I love this. So code comments. Now, we talked about code comments before. So let me just go in and add a comment here. So I'm going to do a // This is what's called a single line comment. And if you want to, this is stuff that only other programmers see. Okay? So if only other programmers see, I can use all sorts of acronyms and jargon and stuff. For example, remember the goofy term about inflating? I could say inflate the display. Okay, now outside of outside of an Android developer, the word inflate wouldn't mean anything at all. But it's okay to use jargon and acronyms here. Kind of makes sense? Good. And the multi-line is this guy. And I mentioned to you before that I typically put an extra asterisk in there just to make it look pretty. I mean, there's no technical reason why I have a line of asterisks there. It's just me. And then I'm going to say, here are all of the controls we need to talk to. Okay, something like that. Okay, so this is a multi-line. This is a single line comment. So one of the things we need to do is we need to talk about the rules. And hey, look, every time I say rules, you really need to perk up and start taking notes, because when I say here are the rules for whatever the topic is, you can pretty much well be guaranteed that's going to be on the quiz. Every time, okay? So whenever you hear me say, here are the rules, you go, wait, and you start writing it down. Okay, good. So, rule number 1. The target audience is you and fellow developers, so it's perfectly okay to use acronym and jargon, like inflate. That doesn't make any sense to anyone else, but it makes sense to the programmer. The other rule is you should describe complex things that are not easy to understand. In other words, like, if you can't figure it out at first glance, you're looking at it going, what on earth is that? Well, then that's where you need a comment that says, well, the following code does this. And you go, oh, okay. It's designed to help out. And then document a decision. Perhaps there's like 4 different ways of doing something, and you chose method number 3. Other people coming behind you might say, well, look at this novice. He did it using method number 3. I would have used method number 2 and go in there and make some changes. But if you document why you did it that way, you say, I'm using method number 3 because the next programmer coming behind you is going to be a heck of a lot, more hesitant in saying, well, I'm going to change that to method number 3 or 4 or whatever, because your documented decision of why you did it that way. And they look at it and go, oh, okay, I got it. And then the last one is an anti-rule, and that is don't document everything, because that's just dumb. Not every line needs to be documented. Just document the things that need it. Kind of makes sense? Obvious things don't need it. Like, I would not go in here and say, this calls the super version, and I wouldn't document, hey, we're getting ready to set the content view. I can see that it's going to be setting the content view. Okay, so those are the 4 rules. Well, 3 rules and an anti-rule. All right, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark. You guys know how this works.